How does a 14-year-old girl end up in black trash bags along the side of a highway after the system was supposed to protect her? What does it say about the psychology of the perpetrator who doesn't just take a life, but chooses to dismember it and leave it in the desert? Stay with me, because today we are looking at the case where the red flags weren't just ignored, they were buried under layers of institutional failure. I'll show you the behavioral patterns of a killer who operates in the shadows of a broken system and why certain personality types thrive when there is no oversight. Welcome. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of the Emily Pike case. I will be focusing on the main mental health and psychological indicators while providing the backstory. I don't just talk about the crimes, I talk about the psychology behind the crimes and the mysteries that captivate us. I look beyond the facts of the case to understand the why of the crime. My analysis is based on my speculations, is not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. On January 27, 2025, at approximately 7:45 p.m., Emily Pike climbed out of her bedroom window at a group home in Mesa, Arizona, for the last time. This wasn't a random act of teenage rebellion, but a desperate flight from a facility where she felt unsafe, unheard, and profoundly isolated. When we look at the psychological landscape of this case, the first flag isn't found in the killer, but in the environment that allowed a killer to find her. The group home, Sacred Journey Incorporated, had a history of runaways, yet the psychological impact of repeated escapes on a child's sense of security is often overlooked. Emily was a member of the San Carlos Apache tribe and had already survived significant trauma before she ever set foot in that Mesa group home. In 2023, she had reported being assaulted on the reservation, a report that was met with a lack of professional crisis intervention. Instead of specialized investigators, tribal game and fish rangers were the ones who responded to her outcry for help. From a mental health perspective, this is a catastrophic failure in a trauma-informed care that likely shattered Emily's trust in authority figures. Imagine the psychological state of a young girl who speaks her truth only to have the system respond with indifference. This brings us to our first major psychological indicator, the exploitation of the vulnerable by a calculated predator who recognizes a lack of protection. Was the perpetrator someone who watched these homes, knowing that the children inside were already considered problematic or runaways? Predatory psychology often involves grooming an environment, not just a person, looking for places where a disappearance won't be immediately questioned. The group home didn't even notify Emily's family that she was missing until an entire week had passed since she climbed out of that window. That 7-day gap provided a psychological safety zone for the perpetrator to commit their crime and dispose of the evidence without interference. When we examine the mindset of a killer who chooses a victim like Emily, we are looking at a high degree of opportunism combined with a lack of empathy. The killer likely knew that Emily was a runaway, which in their mind made her a low-risk target because the alarm wouldn't be raised immediately. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. On February 14, 2025, a group of people near mile marker 277 on Highway 60, northeast of Globe, Arizona, found 2 black trash bags. Inside those bags were the partial remains of Emily Pike, which had been discarded 100 miles from where she was last seen. The choice of Valentine's Day for the discovery is a grim coincidence, but the state of the remains tells us everything about the perpetrator's psyche. Why would someone go through the grueling, gruesome process of dismemberment instead of just hiding a body in the vast Arizona desert? Dismemberment often signals a perpetrator who has been deep-seated need for control or a pathological fear of being caught through identification. It reflects a depersonalization of the victim, where the human being is reduced to a series of logistical problems that need to be solved. Psychologically, this suggests a person who can compartmentalize extreme violence and maintain a facade of normalcy in their daily life. The fact that Emily's hands and arms were missing is a very specific behavioral clue that points to a desire to hinder forensic identification. This level of post-mortem manipulation suggests a killer who was not acting in a heat of passion, but someone who was cold, methodical, and perhaps experienced. Does this level of forensic awareness suggest that the killer has a criminal history or perhaps a background that familiarized them with police methods? We have to look at the motive of disposal as a message, where leaving remains in a semi-visible area suggests a conflicting need to both hide and be seen. The location, near the Tonto National Forest, is rugged and desolate, yet the bags were placed where they could eventually be found. This brings us to a critical question. What kind of psychological gratification does a killer get from leaving a victim on the fringes of their own community? Emily was just found outside the reservation where her family lived, a detail that adds a layer of psychological cruelty to the crime. If the perpetrator was aware of her background, this could be seen as a return of the victim in the most horrific way possible. As of late 2025, no arrests have been made, though the authorities have stated they are interrogating potential persons of interest. The absence of a suspect allows us to focus on the profile of someone who can commit such an act and then vanish back into society. We also have to consider the psychology of the bystander, including the staff at the group home who reportedly struggled to manage the facility's safety. Emily told police in previous runaway incidents that the staff would argue with the children, making her feel uncomfortable and desperate to leave. This environmental stressor is a psychological red flag for the broken window theory of institutional care. When the standards of care drop, the safety of the residents become a secondary concern, creating a vacuum predators are quick to fill. Emily's uncle, Alfred Pike, has been vocal about the fact that Emily wasn't just a runaway statistic, but a child who loved art and had dreams of college. The psychological impact on the San Carlos Apache community is immense, as this case highlights the missing and murdered indigenous women crisis. There is a specific trauma that comes with being a part of that group that feels invisible to the law, which perpetrators often use to their advantage. Does the killer feel a sense of entitlement to these victims because they believe the world won't look as hard for them? The behavior of the perpetrator in the weeks following the murder is likely marked by a stabilization where they return to their routines without outward signs of guilt. Psychopaths or those with high narcissistic traits don't experience remorse in a traditional sense. They experience risk management. Their primary stress isn't the life that they took, but the possibility of their own life being interrupted by an arrest. If the killer is watching the news or following a combined reward offer of $200,000, they may be experiencing a sense of duping delight or superiority. This is a psychological thrill of knowing something the authorities don't, a high that can lead to leakage where they drop hints to others. The fact that Emily had a history of running away 4 times in the months leading up to her death shows a pattern of avoidant coping in response to trauma. She wasn't running to something as much as she was running from the reality that she felt was unbearable to her. When a child is in that state of mind, their threat detection system is often overwhelmed, making them more susceptible to a predatory lure. A predator might offer a ride, food, or a place to stay, masking their true intentions behind a helpful person. This mask of sanity is a hallmark of the most dangerous offenders, who can appear empathetic and kind until their victim is isolated. We have to ask, was Emily lured by someone she thought she could trust, or was she snatched by a force in the crime of opportunity? Surveillance footage captured images of Emily walking alone near the intersection of East McKellips Road and North Mazur Drive on the night that she vanished. This initial solitude suggests she wasn't under immediate duress, but it marks the start of her vulnerability window. However, the transition from walking alone to dismemberment in a bag requires a massive psychological shift in the environment. It requires a perpetrator who is capable of rapid escalation, moving from a social interaction to lethal violence in a short window of time. The Pinal County Medical Examiner determined the cause of death with blunt force trauma, which is a very personal and hands-on method of killing. Unlike a shooting, blunt force trauma involves a physical struggle and a direct application of force, suggesting a high level of anger or a need to dominate. This leads to the question of displacement, where the killer takes out their frustrations with the world on a victim who cannot fight back. The dismemberment that followed could be a way for the killer to undo the personhood of the victim, making the crime easier to live with. If they don't see Emily as a girl, but as evidence, they can process the trauma of the event through a lens of logistics rather than morality. This brings us to the psychological red flag of emotional flattening, where an individual shows no reaction to extreme violence or suffering. The father of Emily, Jensen Pike, filed a wrongful death lawsuit in August of 2025 through the Phillips Law Group against Sacred Journey Incorporated, the group home. From a mental health perspective, the lawsuit is a form of seeking agency in a situation where the family felt completely powerless. The betrayal trauma felt by the family is twofold. First, by the perpetrator, and second, by the institutions that were paid to keep her safe. The psychological indicators in this case point towards a perpetrator who was likely a local or someone very familiar with the geography of Highway 60. Transporting remains 100 miles requires a level of comfort with the area and a belief that they can travel that distance without being stopped. It suggests a controlled offender who has access to a vehicle, a private space to commit the dismemberment, and the time to execute the plan. This isn't the work of a transient or someone in a psychotic break. This is the work of someone who is functioning within society. They may have a job, a family, and a reputation, using those things as a shield against suspicion. How many people in that killer's life are seeing small behavioral changes, but choosing to look the other way out of fear or denial? The bystander effect can happen with a killer's own inner circle, where family members ignore red flag behaviors like sudden cleaning or missing tools. The FBI and the Gillett County Sheriff's Office are still looking for that one piece of information that will bridge the gap between suspicion and conviction. The psychological analysis of the silent witness is often someone who knows the truth but is waiting for the permission to speak. This massive reward is a psychological incentive designed to tip the scales of loyalty for someone who might be protecting the killer. As we look at the clues from the black bags to the specific choice of the Tonto National Forest, we see a trail of behavioral breadcrumbs. The killer left a signature in a way that they handled Emily's remains, a signature of profound disrespect and a desire to erase her identity. But Emily's identity has only grown stronger in the wake of this tragedy, becoming a symbol for justice and reform in the foster care system. The aha moment in this case isn't just the horror of the crime, but the realization of how many safety nets had to fail for this to happen. If the group home had reported her missing immediately, if the original assault had been investigated properly, would the perpetrator have had the chance? The psychology of missed opportunities is a haunting element of this story, showing how institutional neglect creates a playground for the predatory. The perpetrator's motive was never fully understood, but their method reveals a person who views human life as disposable. They likely felt a sense of immortality as they drove those 100 miles, believing they were smarter than the police and the tribe. But the psychology of the hunted eventually takes over as the pressure of the ongoing investigation and a massive reward begins to close in. Every detail that we've discussed, from the missing limbs to the choice of the highway, is a piece of a psychological puzzle that leads to one person. That person is currently living among us, carrying the weight of a secret that is fundamentally antisocial and pathological. They are likely monitoring this case very closely, looking for leaks in the investigation to see how much the police actually know. This obsessive monitoring is a key red flag for an involved suspect who may even try to insert themselves into the search or the conversation. We must remain vigilant and remember that the why of this crime is rooted in a predator's ability to exploit a child who felt she had nowhere to run. By talking about the psychology of the Emily Pike case, we ensure that she is never forgotten and that the perpetrator has no place left to hide. This is such a horrific case. This child needed protected, and she was not protected. Her parents should have been notified from the group home immediately. Why was there such a gap? We don't know. That remains a mystery. And I want to advocate for foster care reform as well. I worked with a lot of kids with trauma. I worked with a lot of kids in the foster care. And you may understand this as well. A lot of kids fall through the cracks. A lot of kids in the foster care, they experience a lot of a trauma and abuse in their life, and they're deemed a problem child. And they're treated like a problem child. And that's a problem. That's the problem in this whole thing. These children deserve a safe place. They deserve adults in their life to care for them and take care of them. So what did you think about this case? Have you heard about it before? Were there any elements that stood out to you? If you want more mental health analysis of true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe for more. And if you found this case compelling, be sure to watch this next story. It will make you more aware of your surroundings. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.